Welcome to another episode of The Conversation right here on News Central TV in the month of July. And of course, on this program, we get to discuss political stories making rounds on the African continent. I am Rita Omodia. Now, on today's edition of The Conversation, we will be analysing the new agreement between the United Kingdom and Nigeria on illegal migration. Also, as the elections in Kenya draws nearer, we will look at development, the country ahead of the polls, and William Ruto's manifesto. We'll begin right now with the UK-Nigeria immigration agreement. Now, the British and Nigerian governments have announced a new migration agreement which will increase the deportation of dangerous foreign criminals to Nigeria. This was disclosed by the UK Home Secretary, Priti Patel, in a social media statement on Thursday evening. She said that the new plan for immigration comes after the controversial deportation agreement with Rwanda. 13 Nigerians were removed to Lagos on a June 30 flight, and 8 Ghanaians, 3 criminals and 5 immigration offenders. According to a UK government minister, over 10,000 people had been deported from the UK between January 2019 and May 2022. Now, join us live for this conversation. We have Priscilla Nwikpo, a broadcaster based in London. We also have Dr. Temitope Maberu Fagunwa. He is an historian, scholar, activist, and co-convener of the Pan-Afrikan Consciousness Renaissance. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you here. So I'll start with you, Priscilla. Now, Patel said, our new landmark agreement with Nigeria will increase the deportation of dangerous foreign criminals to make our streets and country safer. Now, is this going to be a safe deal for Nigeria, and what are the likely implications of this deal for the Nigerian government?
Thank you so much for having me. It's very interesting. You asked the question if it's going to be safe for Nigeria. The details of the deal seem to be somewhat sketchy. Now, from what I understand so far, there was an agreement, a prisoner transfer agreement between Nigeria and the United Kingdom during Goodluck administration and the Cameron administration. That agreement was 11 years ago. During that agreement, it was agreed that they would transfer dangerous criminals rather than having criminals, those who are found to be criminals, serve their sentence here in the UK, that they would rather send them to Nigeria. They would serve their sentence, and it would save them having to deport, which made a lot of sense. However, nothing transpired. Part of that agreement was that the UK were concerned about prisoners, the conditions of Nigeria's prison, and so they were going to provide some £750,000. For Nigeria to be able to build an extension to the Kirikiri prison, for instance, in Lagos, that would be a more habitable condition for prisoners to be able to, reside. That agreement, from what I understand, from what we understand, or from what is on the ground, did not go ahead. And so in 2014, it was revived again. The conversation, was revived yet again for this agreement to go ahead. And at that point, when our now Prime Minister, then Foreign Minister, Boris Johnson, took over as Foreign Minister, he then agreed that they would commence working on this agreement. And at that time, I think it was something like £14,000 was spent. The £14,000 was spent for the design of the new extension and, of course, feasibility and so on and so forth. But then it was scrapped. And then suddenly, out of the blue, we hear the Home Office, the Secretary, tell us via social media that a deal has been signed. There is no detail of this deal online, or the Ministry of Justice have not told us. We do not know what that means for Nigeria. Is it a continuation of the PTA? Is it a new deal? Are there new conditions now that has been agreed? The understanding, and it is being reported, that she was to have a meeting with our High Commissioner, the Nigerian High Commissioner, 2 days ago. But unfortunately, that meeting did not take place. So we do not know exactly what this agreement is. But we also know that, as you mentioned there, that some prisoners immigration offenders as well as hardened criminals have been deported to Nigeria. I think the real issue is the concern which we have at the moment in the United Kingdom with the British government's various deals and various immigration new rules that they have. This has been an issue for immigrants. Goes right way back to our former Prime Minister, then Home Office Minister, Mrs. Theresa May, when she commenced the hostile environment. We have seen the United Kingdom acting in a manner that really they would not usually act in, which is that people are being deported, whether or not they succeed through the courts. Sometimes they're still being subject to deportations. We're having people being deported even after they have served their time, and they should be able to remain here. One of the individuals that was to face deportation was a woman who had served her time, but then she's been taken away from her family. And so that begged the question, whatever happened to her rights, her human rights, that allows her to have a right to remain with her family here in the UK. So there are a lot of issues that has been thrown up, but I'm not too sure that, it is something that will benefit Nigeria, given the stand of the British government at the moment on deportation, on immigration, and so on and so forth.
All right, thank you, Priscilla. We'll still come back to this human rights for migrants, but right now I want to take Dr. Temitope's views on this, because apart from this so-called deal with the UK government, we also know that earlier in June, President Muhammadu Buhari had an agreement on transfer of sentenced persons that will allow Nigerians serving jail terms in Spanish prisons to complete their sentences back home if they so wish. So, Dr. Temitope, now, Priscilla talked about an extension of the Kirikiri prison, which so far the details are still sketchy. Does Nigeria's correctional system have the capacity to handle such at this point in time?
Well, let me begin by saying that it's so unfortunate that currently we have who's at the realm of power do not really understand the importance of some of the things, document that they sign, they sign for, because the point is that this whole document reminds some of us of the scandal that went down in 2015 when the erstwhile Prime Minister of Britain, David Cameron, had said that, they, as a form of reparation, that they will be, repatriating Jamaican prisoners to Jamaica, as a way of expressing their own interest in, the reparation for slavery and what have you. And I think this is nothing but an insult, a great insult, because whenever you are living in a society and you somehow, because you needed to, make ends meet, you somehow find yourself behind the bars. Now, that should be the problem of the immediate society.
Dr. Temitope, we really want to hear you clearly what you're saying. Can you help us take off your earpiece so that we could hear you clearly, please? Thank you so much, Dr. Temitope.
So whenever you're living in a society where you turn out to become a criminal, it should be the business of the immediate community, actually not the business of the home country. The point I'm making is that this policy is coming at, at the wrong time, because right now we are talking about a society or the African continent that needed to be respected. When you look at what happened in Rwanda, the UK government, a number of people in Rwanda had to condemn this same policy that the Nigerian government had just signed with UK. So we are saying that at this time, we do not even have the requisite to deal with, prisoners back here, to begin with. Just 2 days ago, about 21 Africans landed in Ikeja airport, from UK, actually. But the point is that the Nigerian government could not even identify some of these persons that were brought into our homeland from UK, as a way to test run this policy. They could not even account for the identities of these persons. A number of them were moved to Ghana and some other persons were moved to an unknown destination. So right now, we don't even have the database. We don't have the, necessary documents and information to be able to truly identify if indeed some of these persons are Nigerians. Because you've mentioned it. The entirety of our prison system at this time is nothing to write home about. It is a reality. The entirety of our prisons, whether you like it or not, they are congested. You cannot begin to talk about the harmful condition of kirikiri, So you see, what you're saying is that even if you're a prisoner, you deserve, to be respected by whatever society you have to serve your terms in. And if the UK, government is saying at this time that indeed some Nigerians have got to be, repatriated, have got to be returned to Nigeria because they committed then the government should also man up over a responsibility by ensuring that, prisoners are treated with utmost respect. Prisoners have the right, to contest whatever case they are being sentenced for.
Dr. Temitope, sorry to butt in here. Which would be better? Sorry.
That you've lost your fundamental human rights.
Okay, Dr. Temitope, which would be better now? We had this UK Rwanda asylum deal, which a lot of people condemned. Is it better to have them in the UK being treated badly or being brought back to their home country? Which one would be better? Them staying in the UK and being treated poorly, or them coming back to their home countries, as against the UK Rwanda asylum deal?
You see, the point is that there's more to this. There's more of an ulterior motive to this, because if I had committed a crime in a particular country, that country again should be responsible, for whatever crime I must have committed. Because I committed this crime within the social context and realities and conditions of that immediate society. That's the reality, actually. Because some of our persons are saying this and they really do not understand the insults that emanate from policies of this nature. This policy has a racist undertone. For real, it does. Because the point is that the Nigerian state, or particularly the African continent at this time, there's so much crisis going on when it comes to the question of, again, as we have identified, the prison system and what have you. So if I had committed a crime in a particular country, that country should be responsible for, for catering for whatever offense, I must have committed. And ensure that, I serve my terms in the most respected manner, not to begin to ship me all around as if I'm some donkeys or some camel.
Okay, I think I get your point now. The UK should bear their own responsibility, and of course, enough of the whole racist sentiments. I want to bring in Priscilla right now, because there was this UK Rwanda asylum deal, and unfortunately, while a lot of people were waiting to see what would happen, in the last-ditch attempt, we saw the European Court of Human Rights and Court of Appeal in London ground the last series of interventions, and of course the flight wasn't able, we didn't see asylum seekers move over to Rwanda. So do you still think that this plan will actually see the light of day?
Well, there's a lot of uprising here in the UK now. We have individuals who are protesting and questioning the government and questioning, the reasoning behind these policies. There is absolutely no doubt that these policies are racistly, engineered. And as a result of racism is why they are being, because we just saw recently with the Ukrainian war when it started, the UK government were asking the UK population to take in refugees from Ukraine, and they were willing to support this with some, I think it was £350 or so that the government announced. So when you consider that, and then you consider the fact that the United Kingdom's government went to the Caribbean in the 50s and invited Caribbean nationals to come to the United Kingdom and help to build the country after the war. And they did that. The same government decided to destroy their paperwork. Having destroyed their paperwork, having admitted what they have done, and they then returned some of these, the children of these that were born here, have spent, this is their home. They were then returned and told to leave and seen as
illegal immigrants.
Although the government has accepted that they were wrongdoing, Although the government has accepted what they did, they said they will pay compensation, but that is yet to materialize for most of those who unfortunately were victims of this situation. So you can see the difference, and you can see that clearly racism informs these policies here in the UK. As to whether or not these policies are going to be able to continue, I don't think so. I think that just as we saw with the flight to Rwanda, where the European Court of Human Rights grounded it temporarily for a moment, we're likely to see the same with this new deal, supposedly signed deal with Nigeria, because like I said, it's very sketchy, the details of this deal. When was it signed? Is it a new deal to the PTA agreement? Is it a new deal to what was signed in 2014? Is it different to that? When was this deal originated? What are the terms? What are the conditions? The PTA was an agreement that said, if we have criminals in Nigeria that are of British origin and they're British citizens, if they commit a crime in our country, after the trial, we will send them back to the UK to serve their time. And the UK was supposed to do the same thing. That was the agreement back in 2011. But that there's so much has since changed with that. That particular agreement did not go ahead. Then in 2014, a new agreement was signed. Then it was scrapped, recently. So this new deal, what is it?
Okay.
What is in it? How does it impact the two nations?
All right, Priscilla, while we're looking at what exactly this deal entails, let's look at the British government and, of course, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Now, earlier on, he was under pressure of breaking COVID-19 rules, and fortunately, he survived this. So do you think that Boris Johnson is so much under pressure? Because we're seeing, first we had the Rwanda-UK asylum deal, and now we have a deal with Nigeria. Is Boris Johnson under any pressure at all?
Well, I don't consider his pressures to be any thing different to any prime minister would be. Considering the season that we're in, naturally, most governments around the world are under pressure at the moment because we're all experiencing the aftermath of COVID and aftermath of lockdowns and the effects and the impact of that. So his pressures are I think most of his pressures are self-inflicted. And that is what he's experiencing currently. But having said that, the pressures that he's under should not prevent the government from, demonstrating some degree of human rights. It shouldn't prevent the government from doing what is right for her own citizens. Her own citizens that are of African descent should not be subjected to different policies to that of those who are who are Caucasian. And that is where the problem is here. And as long as those policies are maintained, there's going to be a continued uprising. We saw an uprising recently when when immigration went to a suburb of London, went to Peckham. They went to try, in an attempt to deport, to pick up some citizens and deport them. And they had the community rise up and say, no, this is not happening. We're seeing this happen more frequently here in the United Kingdom. So I think it's going to continue, and I think it's going to make it quite difficult for the government to be able to continue with these hostile environments and these hostile practices when it comes to immigration. I think it's important to understand this. Now, our Home Secretary said, she wanted to make London safer.
Yeah.
Now, it's very important that we understand that according to the police, there were 5.8 million new crimes as of last year, 2021. Now that isn't that interesting, considering that the year before we spent, a predominant amount of our time in lockdown.
Yeah.
As of February 2021, for the month of February, 333,740 new offenses in 1 month alone. These offenses are not committed strictly by immigrants. And we cannot, blame everything on immigrants.
Okay.
There's been an underfunding of the police. There's been an underfunding of so many things by this government for over 10 years. And they need to take responsibility for that.
Okay.
And then we'll begin to see the change.
All right, Priscilla, we're seeing a lot of lapses from the British government, but mostly the major comment is this racist sentiment. And unfortunately, we still had issues of migration. We saw what happened at the Melilla and Morocco border, where a lot of African migrants also died. And we're still seeing reports of human rights violations going on. Now, comprised of 23 objectives, all of which are commitments by UN member states. The implementation of the Global Compact on Migration, GCM in Africa, was aimed at building a stronger global architecture on migration governance, protection of human rights, and elimination of all forms of discrimination. Now, Dr. Temitope, the AU Commission signed on this and agreed on this Global Compact Act. Now, how do you think that the AU has been able to deliver on this mandate and ensure that the rights of African migrants are actually protected?
Begin by saying that unfortunately we haven't had a strong institution on the continent. AU is at best a toothless bulldog that cannot bite, that cannot even bark. That's the irony. Because when you begin to look at what has been happening in Libya since 2011, the consistent death of African, migrants, you would begin to ask yourself if indeed we have, an existing continental organization within the African continent. Let us don't forget again that in 2010, member states met, at Addis Ababa again to discuss the question of African, the African migrant crisis and what have you. But no concrete resolution was reached. In fact, the government of Spain was invited to this particular meeting, but nothing concrete.
All right. Okay. While we're still trying to get Temitope online with us, let's hear from Priscilla now. Priscilla, you were talking about racist sentiments going on and, of course, the rights of Africans. Now, we had this AU Commission sign this Global Compact on Migration in Africa. And according to Dr. Temitope, he calls the AU a toothless bulldog. How would you think that the AU has been able to deliver on this mandate and ensure that the rights of African migrants are actually protected?
I absolutely agree with Dr. Temitope. The AU are a toothless bulldog. It's high time the AU rose up and begin the fight for African migrants. What is happening at the Spanish border, as you mentioned, is beyond the word tragic. Nobody's reporting on it. It's not important. I think what we have seen with the Ukraine war is that the racism of the West has become so magnified that we can no longer sit back and just allow for African citizens to be treated anyhow and to be continually abused. It's high time the AU rise up, and if the West are not keeping to their end of their agreement, because what often happens is that these agreements, they sound very kind, they sound very generous, and everybody signs these agreements. And when it comes to implementation, you find that the West are not implementing their end of the bargain according to, the agreement, and nobody does anything about it. It is left for the African Union to ensure that everybody is keeping their end of the agreement, but they seem to falter and fail in doing that. They really need to, be able to make it worth their existence has to make sense to the African people. Currently, it isn't.
Okay, Priscilla, while we're still looking at the issue of migration, now, one of the things that Priti Patel said that this will help tackle illegal migration and putting the emphasis on illegal there. Now, do you feel that this plan of theirs will actually help tackle illegal immigration?
Mrs. Patel's, Ms. Patel, my apologies, beg your pardon, is often, she uses these words and it sounds so right, doesn't it? It will help to tackle illegal immigration. But no, it doesn't. It doesn't tackle illegal immigration.
Okay.
All too often, when you look into the detail of what is actually happening, you will find that the United Kingdom are often failing in their part of the agreement to do what is proper, to do what is necessary to ensure that we don't have people migrating into the country dangerously or otherwise. And so I think that, her saying this will help to tackle, no, it doesn't tackle. I think there are other measures that needs to be looked at in order to address those problems properly. And those measures needs to be looking at the root of illegal migration and the root of people trafficking. Those are the areas that she needs to look into. Returning prisoners is not going to address that issue.
All right, root of illegal migration. We have Dr. Fagunwa back with us online. Earlier, we're talking about the safety of African migrants and the role that AU plays. So what more can be done to ensure the safety of African migrants?
Well, I think firstly, member states have got to, man up over their responsibilities by taking the issue, to the United Nations organization, because the crisis of the African continent is an international crisis also. And there's a necessity to internationalize, this question of, African migrants and what have you. But beyond that is, again, member states have got to understand the fact that the African continent right now is undergoing one of the most, turbulent periods in our history. We are talking about, the crisis of insecurity, terrorism across the African continent, and, the biggest of all, the crisis of poverty, the crisis of unemployment. And all of these crises have, propelled this issue beyond expectation and beyond what ordinarily ought to be, the crisis that ought to confront a particular country. And I'm saying that governments across the African continent must see to how wealth can be redistributed. Because look at the scenario we have to deal with now for the past, few days. The assassination of over 40 African migrants. In Spain, you cannot begin to look at this and not feel that there's something wrong with those at the corridors of powers. Because we cannot consistently lose mass of our people to all of these crises. It is ordinarily, legal for someone to say that, well, I need to find greener pasture elsewhere and what have you. It is, it is within the context of your fundamental human right to do so. And as such, even if you are a so-called illegal migrant, you ought to be respected. Your fundamental human right is still within the context of, the context of what binds us as, international, as members of the international community. And again, we must identify the hypocrisy of the international organizations in all of these dynamics. You and I, we should be conscious of the fact that during the interwar years, the first World War and the Second World War, we have, European migrants wanted to come into the African continent, particularly in 1944, in 1945, we had European migrants, working their fingers to the bones to come into the African continent because they were running for the crisis happening as at that time in Europe. And they were welcomed. They were not even considered to be illegal. Yeah. But whenever it comes to that of the African people, whenever, the tide is being changed, the narrative is being changed, then we are then said, immediately called illegal.
All right, Dr. Fago, I think you rightly said it, that African governments need to step up on their responsibility and protect the lives and properties of all their citizens. So we can go on this. And of course, we're still hoping for the safety of all African migrants while we still get the details of this deal between the UK and the Nigerian immigration agreement. Thank you so much, Priscilla and Nwikpo, for joining us on this conversation. And of course, Dr. Temitope Fagunwa for joining us on the conversation.
Thank you for having me.
And right now, we'll take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll be dealing with Kenyan politics as the August 9 election draws near. The deputy president has finally unveiled his manifesto. We'll have details after this break.